Um, Thank you. Um, and we have our grant, our Safe Streets and Roads for All grant, where we are in the process of working with our consultant team of FHI, and they'll give introductions in a minute, to update and create an updated transportation safety action plan for our region. So we did crash analysis, the team did, and we are presenting that today. And with that, I'll let Mike Morehouse and Christian get us started here today.
Okay, thank you, Roger. All right, so today's agenda will cover, we'll start a little bit with who we are, what this study is all about. We'll briefly cover the crash analysis methodology we used, and share with you some of the regional and town level maps that we really want your eyes on and some feedback on. We'll follow up with Perry, who will talk a little bit about some of our engagement efforts to date, and then we'll have a little bit of a question and answer period. So again, here's the project team. This is led by the Capital Region Council of Governments. So Roger and his team, Rob, Kara, Annika, and Aaliyah, have been really helpful in working alongside the consultant team throughout this process. I'm Mike Morehouse. I'm the project manager, but I'm supported by Christian Mazer, who's with me today, and Cassandra Valcourt. We have really excellent partners on our team, CDM Smith with Rebecca and Carl, who are leading the crash analysis phase of the project, and the tool design group team of Shauna and Perry, who are helping with engagement and other aspects of the project as well. So just starting briefly with an overview of the SS4A program. It is a federal program. It provides funding for a number of things, but particularly planning and infrastructure for reducing or eliminating fatal and serious injury for our streets. The grant that CROG got was a planning grant, which basically covers the development of a safety action plan, which is what we're calling this study. The safety action plan is an important first step, because what it does is it establishes the need. Where are the serious injury and fatal crashes, and how do we prioritize those for future investment. This will put the region and the municipalities in a position to go after implementation funding to actually make some meaningful progress in reducing these serious crashes. I should also say that New Britain was a sub-recipient of this grant. So while they're part of this effort, they're also conducting their own municipal SS4A safety action plan. That gets into a little bit more depth in terms of identifying, concepts that can be advanced for implementation funding applications. And that's something that all towns could do. So the study is based on the Safe Systems approach, which is Federal Highways approach to dealing with roadway safety. And the premise that overarches everything is that death and serious injury is unacceptable. It's really important, because as soon as you start to accept that these kinds of crashes are just a byproduct of the way we are, and you make compromises. And what we really want to do is set a target to eliminate all of these crashes and make some really crucial decisions to get to that goal. We know humans make mistakes, and their decisions lead to crashes. So we want to make sure that we're developing a system that mitigates those mistakes, protects the vulnerability that we are as humans. We're certainly not, our exposure to heavy vehicles and the speeds at which those crashes occur, result in traumatic injuries to our bodies. The responsibility is shared. This is across all governmental agencies, certainly the consultant community, designers, the automotive industry, and so on and so forth. Everybody has a shared responsibility for safety. And that really, this planning is about being proactive, not waiting till crashes occur and trying to address the causes of those crashes, but rather looking at the locations where crashes are most probable and then addressing them before crashes actually happen. And providing redundancy in the system. The transportation system covers a lot of different things. So making sure that if one area of the system fails, other areas are still able to protect humans from serious injury and death. So that's a quick overview. That's really what guides a lot of the work. But we have a Vision Zero task force that CROG has assembled, and they meet routinely, monthly, bi-monthly, depending on the need. But it's made up of leaders from, government, certainly CROG, many of the member municipalities within CROG, law enforcement and safety, emergency response officials, data analysts at UConn, policy experts and so on. So this group gets together to talk about, really some of the changes in the program. They're guiding the work that we do. So obviously they're in a reviewing capacity to make sure that, we're following all the procedures in the federal guidelines. But the other important role that they've had is they're important in establishing the goals for the study. And so through discussion, they've come up with 2 goals. The first of which is to reduce fatal and serious injuries down to 0 by the year 2040, right? And that's an important goal that's required by SS4A. And they have a secondary goal of reducing all crashes by 50% by 2032. So the idea there was that while we still want to strive for 0 fatal and injury crashes, there's still a lot of crashes that occur in the region, and having an interim year where there's a meaningful reduction in those crashes is something that we should target and measure over time. So after we're done with this plan, CROG will continue to monitor and update the plan to see those goals to fruition. So these are the 8 elements of a safety action plan. What I just told you about with the task force is really one. It's that leadership, commitment, goal setting. We have the planning structure, but today we're really going to talk about the results of crash analysis and some of the engagement collaboration. In subsequent months, we'll be doing the remaining pieces of the plan. And the idea is that we want to deliver a draft report to Federal Highway by early June, and then a final report to Federal Highway by December, of course, which you'll all have some input on as well. So I'm going to cover quickly crash analysis methodology. I'm not going to get too into the weeds here. I think a lot of you are probably very familiar with Connecticut's crash data repository and how that's used. We established the years of 2019 through 2023 as our 5-year period where we have, a complete data set. There was a prior regional action plan that actually only used 3 years of data, but the best practices recommend 5 years. So we're updating it based on that. And there'll be a 5-year rolling, crash estimate, going on beyond this study. So every time the data is updated in the repository, every year there'll be a new 5-year average calculated. It's also important to note that we've excluded some of the limited access facilities like interstates, the interchange ramp systems, and limited controlled access freeways. There's really a separate process for looking at safety. So, state highway action safety plans tend to look at those facilities. So we've excluded that data from our data set, and we're really focusing on all the roads outside of those high functional classifications. And just to establish some terminology, crash severity, one of many things that we look at, but certainly crash safety outcomes for SS4A rely on the severity. We're following the CABCO code system, in which K is denoted as a fatal injury and K is a serious injury. Those are the 2 primary safety action plan categories that we want to use. But there's 3 others of suspected minor injury, possible, and property damage only. Those can also be weighted using the EBTO system. It's equivalent property damage only, which takes property damage as a unit of 1. And then there's various multiples of economic loss associated with the different severity types, all the way up to, K, which has the highest level of economic loss associated with a crash of that nature. And we'll explain in a minute why those are important. So the SS4A safety action plan process really requires a high injury network. It's very data specific. Again, it's looking at those KA serious and fatal injuries at the regional level. So it's looking at intersections and segments, and they're unweighted. And basically, if there's a crash that's either a K or an A, that gets analyzed. And we use about 80% of all of the crashes, as those are the majority, represent the majority of the crashes in the region. So we filter a little bit. Obviously, there's one-off crashes that occur here and there. The 80% number that we use really focuses on those roads that have the highest sort of magnitude of serious crashes. But because it's a regional network and there's different land use types, there's different densities, there's towns and municipalities where there's not a lot going on the high injury network. We also are establishing a high risk network for every single municipality. And what that does is it looks at all severity levels, but it weights them by that EBTO rating that I just explained. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and that's what we're going to ask for your input on in the upcoming weeks. So just to paint a big picture from the regional perspective, and I'm not going to get into great depth, but this will hopefully show that CROG is a very diverse region. It consists of 38 towns and cities. And if you look at it from a land use composition perspective, you have urban, suburban, and rural context types. The orange urban areas represent about 5% of the total land area of the CROG region, suburban 39%, and rural 56%. There's a lot of undeveloped and rural land in CROG. But when you look at where the crashes are, almost 40% of all the crashes happen in the 5% of urban land. So that's the density and concentration of crashes in those areas requires, pretty significant attention. Conversely, you have rural areas, which make up 56% of the region, they only have about 8% of the crashes. So you can kind of see the differences there. And in just a couple of the patterns, I think are kind of interesting. When you look at the time of day where crashes occur, a lot of times they do align with when traffic is the heaviest, which is typically the PM commuter hours. So for rural and suburban areas, you see the majority of crashes happen in the 5 o'clock PM hour, whereas starts a little earlier in the urban areas at 4 PM. But what's different is for every hour of the day, the composition of crashes. For example, on the lower left-hand circle, you can see the red shaded outline of that circle. Between 12 a.m. and 8 a.m. in the morning, rural land has the highest percentages of the crashes in those hours. Whereas in the suburban land, it's between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. So you can imagine, where a lot of people are going and running errands during the middle of the day or going to work and coming home from work, living out in suburban locations. That's where a lot of those crashes occur. And then in the urban locations, we see the highest proportion of crashes between the hours of 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. So things to think about, behavior is different in various land use types. Certainly the density and the number of vehicles and the interaction of vehicles with people differs in all these areas. So these are the kind of things it's just important to recognize based on where your community is located. Same thing with vulnerable users. We have a number of vulnerable user crashes in the region. You can see by land use type, certainly the urban locations have the highest number of pedestrian crashes overall. And that makes sense, where that seems to be where you have the greatest interface between traffic and people on foot. But in the suburban locations, you have the highest proportion of crashes by bicycle. And it simply could be that there's not as much bicycle infrastructure in suburban towns, and therefore you see greater crashes of that type. So again, thinking about different user experiences, different user composition in the different land use types is important. And I think one other piece of information which I find important is really the crashes by age group. We see the younger age groups being higher represented in overall crashes. In fact, for the K&A, the serious and fatal crashes, the top age group for those crashes are between 25 and 29 years. the second being 20 to 24, and the third being 30 to 34. So you think of the ages between 20 and 34, they represent 61% of all the fatal and high injury crashes. But for the study, and those are things to think about when we're defining projects that can help them, solve some of these problems. What we really want to do is establish an elimination of all the K&A crashes. So you can say there's about 2% of KA crashes overall in the CROG region. But over the past 5 years, that represents about 311 crashes per year. And just doing a simple linear regression of that data, if we don't do any interventions, we can anticipate having comparable numbers out into the future, 300 plus crashes per year. But what we want to do is we want to get down to 0 by 2040. So that's going to require, direct intervention at the policy level, the law enforcement level, infrastructure level. So that's what this plan is going to establish, is a series of programs and improvements to get us down to 0 by 2040. This is where the K&A crashes occur in the region. You can really see the density of those crashes in our urban centers: Hartford, East Hartford, Manchester, New Britain, and so on. But you can also see patterns establishing along major corridors. Places like Blue Hills Avenue, routes 44 and 10, the Berlin Turnpike, Main Street in East Hartford. You can see Route 6 is interesting. You don't see a lot of injuries, you see a lot of fatals. So what's going on in Route 6 that's creating such a dangerous environment for users? Those are the kind of things we want to start to dig into and understand what kinds of projects and programs can help us solve some of those deficiencies. And then the vulnerable users, we took a look at the pedestrian and bicyclists, the red being the fatals and the yellows being the high injuries, and then the symbology denoting whether it's a pedestrian or bicycle. So again, you can see along some of those same corridors, we have high numbers of crashes of vulnerable users. So the safety action plan is really going to focus on this high injury network. This is a regional high injury network. It's hard for you to see, but there's going to be a data viewer that CROG's going to host on the website. This is going to allow you to kind of zoom in, see in detail what's going on, whether there's an intersection or a segment, and also be able to overlay other pieces of information. So while SS4A does require an application to include a segment or an intersection on the high injury network, there are other factors that can strengthen an application. Things like community or stakeholder perception, that's important to consider. Also, locations of persistent poverty, where people have a high percentage of zero vehicle households and so on. Vulnerable user crashes. Those are all things that you'll be able to layer on and off here to help see where the critical locations are to start applying for funding. So I'm going to ask Christian just to go over an example. You should have all received some handouts with your individual town or city that has some sample data on it. We're just going to walk through that really quickly so there's a common understanding of what everybody's looking at, and then go through a series of questions that we want to have you think about over the next few weeks.
Let me just interrupt for 1 minute, and that to just say that these maps that Christian is going to be talking about for each town, they are on our website, on our CROG website under CROG Safety Action Plan. It's at the top of that web page. There's a link to each municipality has their own set of crash maps. And that also was in the meeting invite that I had just sent out yesterday. There's a link that just click on a link and it should take you to that website for your municipality. So just wanted to share that. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Roger.
Okay. So yeah, the data sheets that we generated for all of the towns are going to have your municipality identified with the first map being the fatal and serious injury crashes, which is literally just a subset of what we saw at the regional level a few slides ago, with isolated to your town. And so this is what's going at the regional, the important thing to know about this is that the fatal and serious injury crashes are help develop the high injury network. And so that's being done at a regional level, even though right now you're seeing just your municipality. And so like Mike mentioned, this is what is driving the SS4A plan, is the elimination of these fatal and serious injury crashes. And so that's what's important and what goes into the high injury network, which is the next piece of information here. And the important thing to know is that these crashes, whenever the analysis was done, we looked at all of the intersections and corridors in the region, and we identified all of the crashes and summed them up to 80%. And whenever you do that, you get 1.7% of intersections in the region and 2.7% of corridors in the region. And so you might not, if you go back to Mike one, you might see a fatality or a serious injury on your map, but that doesn't correspond to a location on the high injury network. And that's just because it didn't make the 80% threshold. And so that's all that means. And it doesn't mean it doesn't mean that crash is not important. It just means that whenever the high injury network was developed, that was the threshold cutoff. And the other important thing to remember is that the EPDO, the equivalent property damage only, K and A are both weighted exactly the same. And so any time you see a fatality or a serious injury, they're going to be taken into account the same weight whenever the high injury network is developed. And then from there,
Next slide.
Yep. And then for the high risk network, which takes into account the all severity levels, so K, A, B, C, and O, these were developed for your individual town. So each town had its own high risk network developed that was irrespective of the rest of the region. And so what the high risk network for your town will help you do is to get a broader idea of what the crash activity is like, but also again weighted this time by severity. So fatalities and serious injuries carry the most weight, followed by B, C, and O. But the main takeaway is that for the high injury network, it was developed at a regional level where fatal and serious injuries are weighted the same. And for the high risk network, it was developed at the town level, and all of the different severities were weighted. And so the little blurb at the top, 80% of PDO equivalent crashes, that is going to be different for every single town. So in Bloomfield, whenever you sum up all of the crashes up to 80% equivalent to the O category, you get 5% of intersections carrying 80% of the crashes in Bloomfield. And you get 6% of the corridors in Bloomfield carrying 80% of the crashes. So those numbers will change depending on the municipality. In Hartford, for example, where it's the highest, it's 11% of intersections, and I think 8% of corridors, something like that.
Yeah. So some of the more rural land use context towns, you're going to see more, probably a smaller number, of intersections and corridors that lead to that. Whereas, in the denser areas, you probably see higher percentages of the network that need to be addressed. But this is important because SS4A is only one source of funding and one source of action that we can take to reduce crashes of all types. And there are other programs that the state and the feds have. So having this allows you to, not only tap into SS4A money, but other potential programs, and just through, the course of your routine road maintenance projects. If you're repaving, resurfacing a road, and there can be something that could be done that can mitigate some of these crashes, that's something that you can do at the local level through your capital programs.
And then the other pieces of information on the data sheets that you got are just some graphics. So this is the fatal and serious injury crashes in your town based on the ownership of the roadway. So it's either the municipality owns the road or the road is state owned. And this just breaks out what the trends over time for the last 5 years, complete 5 years, were for your fatal and serious injury crashes. So those are all gonna change depending on municipality. And it's important. What you want to take away from this is looking at the trends and seeing, you know, okay, over the last 5 years, have we seen an increase? In Bloomfield in 2023, they doubled the number of fatal and serious injury crashes that occurred from 2022. So those are the kinds of things that we want to be looking at and identifying whenever we're going into the next stage of this project. And then this is also crashes by functional classification. So, you know, the roadway types that make up your town are all different. In, you know, the dense urban areas, there's a lot of not only a lot of local roads, but collectors and arterials. And so the makeup of what your road network is like in your municipality is different. And so this is just showing where we see more crashes compared to other roadway types. And then the table on the bottom is just a summary of all of the crashes that occurred for each severity level over the last 5 years. And so all of this data was used, particularly the severity data, used to generate the high injury and high risk networks. There's a lot of data that we collected, and part of this process is if there are things that your town would like to know more about, discuss with the project team more, that's kind of where we're moving into next.
So I think these are some sample questions that we'd ask you to think about. You know, I guess you're the experts of your town. We want to know, does this data align with your experiences? I would think it would, but there's always some surprises when we talk to people, like they weren't aware of something, but we would like to know that. We'd like to know, you know, which locations, whether they be intersections or corridors, are kind of your highest need, which ones deserve the most attention. Do you have any experiences that you thought would have showed up in the data, but somehow didn't? You know, maybe you have a misaligned expectation in terms of what you're seeing. We'd love to know that. Same thing, locations that feel unsafe. I think perception, you know, we often consider stakeholder and community engagement as data. And it's not uncommon to see locations pop up that the crash data doesn't necessarily corroborate, but it's still important. If people feel unsafe, there could be an underlying factor that could be addressed. Important to know, do you have any projects that have actually been done or recently done or are planned in the community we should know about? Have there been any studies that have pointed towards improvements? You know, we're going to go through a process of identifying projects that address these crashes. But if you've done your own planning and you have your own solutions and you're going to go out and do something maybe with the next repave season, I mean, those are important things to know so that we're not you know, doing something that's different or suggesting something that you've already considered. And then are there any known challenges to implementing safety in your community? So these are just starter questions. We've created a Survey Monkey that you can access either with this QR code or, you know, Roger can send it out via email following this meeting. But we thought it would be easier if we just gave you a simple form. We're happy to take things in writing. We're also happy to have these conversations with you in person. And I think at the end, Roger will say something about how we're going to do that. But this is also one way you can provide feedback to us that's hopefully easy for you. We're going to just quickly wrap up with some of our public engagement activity, and then we'll pause for some comments, questions. So yeah, take it back from here.
So like Mike said, we consider public feedback and engagement and input to be an important data layer for our work. And so part of that was the generation of this public survey that we have been promoting over the last few months. And we will continue to promote. So if you haven't taken it yet, you should take it. We'll get you a link for it. But if you want to go ahead, Mike, what part of the one of the activities in the survey is placing these dots on a map of the region. I believe the purple is improvement, ideas for improvement, and the green/blue is for safety concerns. And just to highlight some of the things that we have been learning from the map responses. I don't want to go too into detail, but because these are important, but they are that we've gotten them in many different forms. So speeding, aggressive driving, illegal maneuvers is putting vulnerable users at risk. And that has been a consistent theme throughout all of our responses, is that vulnerable users are disproportionately impacted, obviously, whenever they're in car crashes, but principally that there are areas where people specifically feel at risk and dangerous and unwelcoming for bicyclists, pedestrians, and people that are not using a vehicle. And that ties into connectivity in the region. So we have received a number of responses that say that connections across the Connecticut River are lacking, and that it is stunting things like economic development, access to jobs, healthcare services, recreation, all of those sorts of things. And also that people are sharing their voices and they say that they want change and they want action, which is exciting to know that there's appetite and enthusiasm around this project and getting some of these things addressed.
You can see that, this mirrors some of the corridors and locations where we actually have a lot of crash data. But there's also a lot of this region that is underrepresented with feedback. So, if you can take this exercise back to your communities, use your distribution networks, whether it's social media or town databases, mailing, email lists, try to get this out to as many people as possible. Because again, this is an important piece of an SS4A grant application, is showing that, there was a public involvement process. People have responded, and, this is a data layer that supports some of the funding initiatives. So important that we try to get some more response to this survey.
And then this is just another summary of the other questions that were in the survey. Most people travel by car. Doesn't come as a surprise, but just to give a brief overview of the rest of the responses that we got. Speeding, aggressive driving are things that people are worried about. Infrastructure improvements that benefit all users, and also specifically protecting vulnerable users. Enforcement has been a theme that many people bring up. And that also that there's enthusiasm and support for a variety of different tactics and strategies that we can use: education, technology, and additional planning activities. So there's a wide variety of responses that we've gotten. And so part of this is going to be collecting it and kind of binning it and applying it to our analysis. And we have almost 500 responses so far, and we're trying to get that up.
Bump it up. Yeah. Perry, you want to just talk about some of the in-person engagement?
Sure. Thanks. So this is just some of the previous engagement we've done. We went to the Pratt Winter Village in December. We had some activities, treats to have people come over. You'll see my colleagues here with the spinner. We asked people some questions about roadway safety. And then on the right here, you'll see we held a Vision Zero workshop in January, where my colleague Shauna was the moderator for this panel to discuss Vision Zero and safety. Next slide. And then coming up, we're doing what we're calling focus groups and then table talk events. So We are doing focus groups with youth and vulnerable groups. April 1st, we worked with the Hartford Proud Drill and Drum and Dance Corps. Students in Hartford, we spoke with them about how they get around the region. We asked them to place pins on the map, as you'll see here in this photo. We also asked them how they get to their friends' houses, how they get to after-school activities and school. And we were hoping just to get students engaged in this process. Usually those are, again, folks who are not driving, but mostly rely on walking, taking public transit, and biking. And we'll be holding additional focus groups coming up. We'll be speaking with AARP to get kind of perspectives from older adults. And then we're also doing what we're calling table talk events, which is an opportunity for um, communities to kind of host their smaller, intimate conversations with one another. So we're offering some stipends for folks to have conversations with their communities. So we have some bike advocates, pedestrian advocates, and other groups. So that our first one will be coming up on April 22nd. And next slide, please. And then we're also continuing to do student engagement. Next Friday, we'll be going to the Silver Lane Elementary School bike bus kickoff. We'll also be going to the Bike and Roll to School week events that are happening across CROG. So there's a New Britain bike day, and then there's also a walk, bike and roll to school day at Smith STEM on May 8th. And then we'll also be in attendance at the Bowers Bike Bus. So we'll have some opportunities to speak again with youth and people who are biking and walking to school. And we also developed this handy little activity book on the right that we're still in the process of finalizing, but it's meant to engage students and youth about safe practices for walking and biking. And then this coloring page we bring along as well to have students color and speak with us as well. So definitely a lot of upcoming engagement as the weather becomes nice and warm and to get outside with some of these children. So those are what's upcoming from us.
Great, thanks, Perry. So Roger, I will I'll throw it back at you if you want to conclude with next steps.
Sure. I think so we want to get any feedback that you have on your crash map. So we do have that. There was a link in the invite to our website if you're having any difficulty in finding your particular municipality's crash maps. Please let me know. Send me an email, give me a phone call. We also will get the region-wide tool that Mike showed, where you can kind of zoom in on the region, how that the high risk network was developed for the regional map. We'll work to get a GIS tool for that. Then we will work on meeting. We don't have an exact schedule yet, but we're working to complete this whole safety project by the end of the year. So in the summer, very early fall, we hope to have additional discussion with our municipalities regarding projects. So this would be similar to what's in our current regional transportation safety plan, which is also on our CROG website, which has an appendix that has usually about 4 pages with a crash map, similar to what was shown to you today for each municipality. And then specific projects were outlined there. So infrastructure projects. The overall plan should address some of the other elements of education and enforcement. We are certainly working on some of those levels in a different capacity. For example, the enforcement we are working supporting our towns as best we can if they are choosing, like, for automated traffic safety devices, that sort of thing. So there are a lot of components to to safety, and there are a lot of tools in the toolbox and a lot of elements of our work to reduce crashes and serious injury and fatal crashes. So with that, maybe I'll just open it up. We will get that form. Mike just had that QR form. I will follow up with our team. We were focused on just having this meeting, getting this crash data out to you. I'll have some other feedback with our transportation committee on just firming up that form of how you can best get any feedback on these particular crash maps. And then down the road, we'll look in the months ahead on specific project locations and selection. So with that, maybe I'll just open it up if there's any other feedback.
And Roger, while we're waiting for any questions, do we want to, is there an opportunity for any individual town to meet with us?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Mike. Yes. So if you want to meet and whether in person or have a online meeting, feel free to reach out to me, and then we can get the members of the team as necessary to look at your individual crash map. You might have some questions on, how those were developed in a little more detail, or question, oftentimes it's not surprising that, you might think, well, we thought this was a high crash location. I'm surprised you're not showing that as a high risk network or high injury network, But sometimes things change. We were just working with one municipality, and we did the roundabout screening study, and with some old data, there was some a high level of serious injury and fatal crashes, kind of in that ranking. But then the data changed over the years, and it didn't kind of show that in more recent crash data. So things kind of do change that way sometimes. So we can have those discussions on an individual basis with you. And then how to kind of consolidate some of those crash corridors and intersections, and you might have link them together for like a safety project location that you might want to call out right in the action plan. So yes, please let me know if you want a follow-up meeting to this kind of introductory meeting where we're kind of showing you where we're at with our overall study and showing you the initial crash data.
There was one question in the chat
Okay.
asking if the fatal stats are the number of incidents or the number of victims. I believe those are incidents.
Those are number of crashes as opposed to number of people, correct? Right?
Yeah, and our understanding is that, sometimes those fatal crashes can take some time for the state to, again, sometimes there's fatalities following the crash that not at the site, and it takes just time to reconcile all that. So, but that's all included in our data. Are there any other questions out there? Hopefully we made it pretty straightforward so that you can look at your crash maps and then, give some thought to, and then ask us questions at a later date. That's fine too.
And we are presenting this again with the same information tomorrow, same time of day tomorrow. We originally had wanted to, we were thinking of having in person and just getting out to all our towns, and the logistics of that just didn't work out. So we kind of went with this online format, 2 overall meetings with the same data. And then I can certainly meet with you on more of an individual basis. We are recording this. I already had one request to make the recording available, so I'll do my best to get that out to our transportation committee in a more public venue as well, or to our committee, so that can be made use as and available. We can maybe get the slide deck on our website as well. And so we want to kind of get as much information out to you as possible, and as we continue to develop our study. What percentages of the SS4A projects cover safety improvement projects? Well, the SS4A projects you know, the SS4A funding program, which this work to develop the action plan is funded through a grant that we received. There are about 5 other towns, municipalities in our region that also got grants for a safety action plan, kind of to do a deeper dive of this. And we will incorporate some of the work that was done by City of New Britain under our grant as a sample, and that might be a good sample of a municipal action grant, not of a safety action plan, to if you want to develop one on your own. And so currently there is the SS4A grant. The notice of funding opportunity is out. It's on the street. Elizabeth Sanderson, who's on the call, is our grant coordinator, and she'd be more than happy to give you more information. And we are having a workshop that you should have gotten a constant contact invitation out. I think we sent them last week, but clarify if not, Elizabeth. And that's I think I'm losing the date off the top of my head, April 26th.
It's going to be Tuesday, April 29th at
29th.
11 a.m. And
Okay,
we have it set up on the calendar. Folks can email me directly and I'll send the Zoom link. So I'll put my email in the chat today too. Thanks.
So I don't know if that really answers the question. The actual improvement projects from SS4A implementation grants nationwide are very small. There's only, the way I think of it, there's about 1 per state per year of an implementation grant for like an infrastructure design construction type project. But there are a lot of planning grants. There are a lot of demonstration grants. We also have some towns have gotten supplemental planning where they want to focus in on one area, similar to what CROG does with some of our other transportation planning projects, where we'll look at a corridor and assess a corridor, existing conditions, alternatives for improvements, to get the starting point for planning for infrastructure projects. So that could be a supplemental planning grant. So in general, in the past, the US DOT has been much more generous with offering planning grant money.
Yeah, and remember when this program started a few years back, the first step is the safety action plan. So everybody's been working to get their safety action plans done and adopted. And now we're seeing a number of states, regions, municipalities getting those. And now the applications are going in for implementation. So it was sort of expected that there wouldn't be a lot of implementation money off at the very beginning, because it's just people didn't qualify for it. Now they do. And so, we have an eye on the future of this program. There's a lot of changes going on at the federal level, but assuming that this program continues to get funding, I would expect to start to see more implementation grants kind of going out in the upcoming years. We're hopeful.
Right.
I don't see any hands up.
I just throw out one other thought is that, the implementation, the planning grants could be relatively wide ranging. We're often thinking about infrastructure projects. There could be something more like with automated enforcement, or education, potentially maybe a safe routes to school type of in that realm of projects. And so keep that in mind as you think of opportunities, especially under this SS4A grant opportunity that's before us right now in the next few months to get an application in.
Yeah, and as I said earlier,
systemic improvements. When Mike was showing that map on the percentage for your town of intersection crashes versus roadway crashes, you could have even maybe consider a townwide systemic improvement. You want to put retroreflective backplates on all your signals, or increase, or update the signage on your major collector roadways in your town, or something like that. Those are all possibilities. Well, we're closing in on it. We wanted to keep it to an hour. I don't know, Mike, did you have any other closing remarks?
No, I don't, other than we'll get out subsequent information, I think via email, Roger, on how they can access that question response form and any other information. But thank everybody for taking the time to do this. This is very important to us, to the region, to you all. So the more input we can get, the better this plan is going to be.
Very good. Well, thank you. Thank you for attending, and we'll look forward to working with you as we continue our planning process.